I used to believe that nothing important ever changed over a drink. That belief held steady for years, right up until the night Luke Carter sat 2 stools away from me and quietly dismantled a life I thought I understood. My name is Ethan Brooks, and at the time, I was living a life that looked complete from the outside. A stable job in marketing. A tidy apartment downtown. A long-term partner who knew my coffee order and my mother's birthday. Mark Reynolds and I had been together for nearly 6 years, long enough for passion to settle into routine and for silence to replace curiosity. We weren't unhappy, at least not in a way that felt urgent. We were just settled. And I had mistaken that for peace. That evening began like many others. Mark had stayed late at work again, leaving a brief text that read, "Don't wait up." I told myself I didn't mind. I reheated leftovers, scrolled through my phone, and stared at the reflection in the darkened television screen. The man looking back at me seemed older than his 32 years, quieter somehow. Like someone who had learned how to disappear politely. That I grabbed my jacket and headed out, not to escape, I told myself, but to breathe. The bar on the corner was modest, wood-paneled walls, low music, the kind of place where nobody tried too hard to be seen. It felt safe. Predictable. I ordered a whiskey and took a seat at the counter, prepared to spend an hour alone with my thoughts. That's when I noticed him. Luke didn't announce himself. He didn't scan the room or perform confidence. He simply existed, boots dusted with something that looked like dried earth, shoulders relaxed, posture unguarded. There was a stillness about him that contrasted sharply with the city's constant urgency. He wore a plain denim shirt, sleeves rolled to his forearms, and his gaze lingered on nothing in particular. A cowboy, I thought, though the word felt inadequate. That I tried not to stare. Instead, I focused on my drink, on the condensation pooling beneath the glass. I reminded myself that noticing someone wasn't betrayal. That curiosity was harmless. Still, my chest tightened in a way I couldn't quite explain. Luke turned toward me, his eyes clear and assessing, not intrusive. "Long day?" he asked, voice calm, unhurried. That I nodded. "You could say that." He smiled, not wide, not charming. Just honest. "Mind if I buy you the next one?" The question landed heavier than it should have. I hesitated, the name Mark flashing through my mind like a warning light. "I'm not really available," I said carefully, unsure who I was trying to convince. Luke didn't flinch. "That's all right," he replied. Wasn't offering anything complicated. Just a drink. Something in his tone disarmed me. No expectation. No insistence. Just presence. I found myself nodding before I could overthink it. "Okay," I said. "One drink." We didn't talk about work or politics or the weather. Luke asked where I was from. I asked why he was in the city. His answers were brief but thoughtful, as if he weighed words before letting them go. He spoke about wide land, early mornings, and the comfort of solitude. I spoke about deadlines, meetings, and the strange exhaustion that came from always being reachable. That I laughed more than I expected to. Not because he was funny, but because he listened. Fully. Like my words mattered simply because I spoke them. As the night wore on, I checked my phone. No messages from Mark. I felt a flicker of guilt, quickly followed by something far more unsettling, relief. The realization sat heavy in my stomach. When Luke stood to leave, he paused. "You seem like someone who's been quiet for a long time," he said gently. "If you ever want company that doesn't ask for more than you can give, I'm around." He slid a folded napkin toward me with his number written neatly across it. That I watched him walk out, boots echoing softly against the floor. The bar felt louder without him, harsher somehow. I stared at the napkin, my pulse steady but my thoughts racing. That I told myself I wouldn't call. I told myself this night would end here, but even then, I knew something had already shifted. And the truth I wasn't ready to face yet was simple and terrifying. It wasn't just a drink. And it never was. I didn't call Luke Carter the next day. Or the day after that. I folded the napkin and tucked it into my wallet, telling myself it was safer there, contained, harmless. Still, I found my fingers brushing against it whenever I paid for coffee or groceries, as if confirming it hadn't disappeared. As if part of me hoped it wouldn't. Life with Mark Reynolds continued on its familiar track. Morning routines. Shared meals eaten half distracted. Conversations that stayed safely above the surface. I noticed, with a discomfort I tried to ignore, how often I compared the way Mark listened now to the way Luke had listened that night. It felt unfair. It also felt unavoidable. 3 days later, after another quiet dinner and another evening spent in parallel silence, I finally texted Luke, "This is Ethan." From the bar, the response came quickly. "I was hoping you'd reach out. That we didn't flirt." Not directly. We talked about small things at first: music, places we missed, the strange intimacy of late-night honesty. Luke never asked questions that pried, yet somehow I found myself offering answers I hadn't voiced in years. I told him about feeling restless in a life I'd carefully built. He told me about choosing solitude over noise, and how people often mistook that choice for loneliness. Our conversations became a quiet rhythm. Texts in the early morning. A call that lasted longer than planned. I didn't tell Mark. I told myself there was nothing to tell. When Luke suggested meeting again, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I did. That distinction frightened me. We agreed on coffee, neutral and harmless, during the afternoon. No secrets, I promised myself. Just conversation. Seeing Luke in daylight felt different. Less mysterious, more real. He looked exactly as he had that night, grounded, unassuming, as if the world rarely unsettled him. We talked for hours. About fear. About choices we made by default. About the cost of staying comfortable. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's version of your life?" he asked quietly. The question struck too close. I answered honestly before I could stop myself. All the time. I went home that evening and found Mark on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He smiled when he saw me, the same familiar smile that had once felt like home. I sat beside him, close enough to touch, yet miles away. When he asked how my day had been, I said, "Fine," and hated myself for how easy the lie came. The guilt arrived slowly, then all at once. It wasn't about what I was doing, but what I was feeling. I thought about Luke when I woke up. I noticed how often I checked my phone. I caught myself editing stories, trimming details, shaping truths into something less threatening. I had crossed a line without stepping over it physically, and somehow that made it worse. Luke noticed the shift in me before I acknowledged it myself. "You don't have to keep talking if this feels wrong," he said one evening. "I won't be offended." "That's the problem," I replied. "It doesn't feel wrong. And that scares me." There was a pause on the line, then his voice, steady as ever. "Sometimes fear just means you're paying attention." A week later, Luke invited me out of the city, to a small rodeo on the edge of town. Nothing loud or dramatic. Just open space, real air. I knew what accepting would mean. Not in action, but in intention. It would be a choice, however small. That I stared at Mark across the dinner table that night, at the man who had shared years of my life, who trusted me without question. The weight of that trust pressed heavily on my chest. I realized then that indecision was its own kind of betrayal. That I texted Luke back before I could lose my nerve. "Okay," I wrote. "I'll come." The moment I sent it, a strange calm settled over me. Not relief. Not excitement. Just clarity. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't pretending I didn't feel something simply because it complicated my life. That I didn't know yet what this choice would cost me. I only knew that staying silent was no longer an option. And whatever waited beyond that open land, it would demand a truth I could no longer avoid. The land opened up as the city fell behind us. Concrete gave way to dust, noise softened into wind, and something inside me loosened with every mile. Luke Carter drove with one hand on the wheel, eyes steady on the road ahead, as if he had always known where he was going. I watched the horizon stretch wider than anything I'd allowed myself to imagine, the rodeo itself was smaller than I expected. Families sat on wooden benches. Horses moved with disciplined grace. There was no spectacle designed to impress, just people rooted in a rhythm older than urgency. Luke greeted a few familiar faces, introducing me simply as Ethan, without labels or explanations. I appreciated that more than I said that we walked along the fence line afterward, the afternoon sun low and forgiving. "You look lighter out here," Luke observed, not as an assumption but an invitation. "I feel like I can hear myself think," I replied. The truth surprised me with its ease. Luke stopped, resting his arms on the fence. "I need to be clear," he said. "I like you. But I won't be the reason you lie to someone else." The words landed clean and sharp. No pressure. No demand. Just honesty. I realized then that whatever this was between us, it wasn't about escape. It was about confrontation, with myself. That night, back in my apartment, the silence felt different. Mark Reynolds was there, folding laundry with practiced efficiency. He looked up and smiled, the same way he always had, and something in me broke open. I couldn't carry the half-truths any longer. "I need to tell you something," I said. Mark sat down slowly, sensing the weight in my voice. I told him everything, not details meant to wound, but the truth that mattered. The conversations. The connection. The realization that I had drifted long before I ever admitted it. I didn't blame him. I didn't defend myself. I spoke plainly, because anything less would be another betrayal. Mark listened, his face a careful stillness. When I finished, he nodded once. "I wish you'd told me sooner," he said quietly. There was hurt in his voice, but also clarity. I think we both knew something was missing. We just didn't know how to name it. We ended things without shouting. Without cruelty. Just two people acknowledging that love, when left unattended, can turn into habit. As Mark packed a bag, I felt the grief fully, years of shared life, folding in on itself. But beneath the sadness was something steadier, relief at no longer pretending. The days that followed were quiet. I stayed alone, resisting the urge to fill the space too quickly. I thought about Luke, about the way he had drawn a line not to control me, but to protect what honesty meant to him. That restraint mattered. It told me this wasn't a fantasy. It was a choice. When I finally called him, my voice didn't shake. "I did what I needed to do," I said. "I figured you would," Luke replied. "I didn't know if you'd call. But I hoped." We met again, not as an escape from something broken, but as two people standing where they actually were. There was no rush. No promises shaped by fear. Just a shared understanding that whatever came next would be built on truth, or not at all. Weeks later, I found myself back at the bar where it had started. Same stools. Same low music. Different man. I thought about how easily my life might have stayed the same if Luke had never offered that first drink. But the truth was simpler, and harder to face. Luke didn't change my life by entering it. He changed it by refusing to let me hide inside it. As I stepped back into the night air, I realized something else too. This wasn't an ending. It was the moment I finally stopped living quietly against myself, and started listening to the life that had been asking, patiently, to be chosen. Time did not rush in to reward my honesty. It arrived slowly, deliberately, as if testing whether I meant what I had chosen. The apartment felt larger without Mark Reynolds, quieter in ways that echoed. I reorganized shelves that didn't need organizing, cooked meals that went half-eaten, and learned the shape of my evenings again. Loss lingered, but it no longer controlled the room. Luke Carter didn't try to fill that space. He checked in, asked how I was sleeping, listened when I admitted the quiet still startled me. We met for walks more than dinners, conversations more than plans. It mattered to me that he never framed himself as a solution. He treated what we were building like something that required patience, not urgency. One afternoon, we stood at the edge of the land outside town, wind combing through the grass. Luke spoke about responsibility, not as a burden, but as a practice. "Freedom doesn't mean doing whatever you want," he said. It means standing by what you choose. I understood then why he had drawn his line so early. It wasn't distance. It was integrity that I began to see how often I'd confused comfort with safety, and safety with happiness. With Mark, I had learned how to belong. With Luke, I was learning how to arrive as myself. Neither truth erased the other. They existed side by side, demanding respect. Weeks passed. I ran into Mark once, unexpectedly, at a grocery store. We exchanged a careful smile, the kind shaped by shared history. "I'm doing okay," he said, and I believed him. We didn't linger. We didn't need to. Closure, I realized, wasn't a conversation, it was a posture. Luke and I didn't name what we were right away. We didn't need to. Our connection grew in the spaces between moments, the quiet laugh when a plan changed, the steady presence during an uncertain day. There was affection, yes, but also accountability. I never felt like I was borrowing a life that wasn't mine. One evening, back at the same corner bar, Luke asked a simple question. "Are you choosing this, or just avoiding something else?" I didn't answer immediately. I thought about the man I'd been when I first walked in there, looking for air but afraid to breathe. "I'm choosing," I said finally. "And I know the difference now." He nodded, satisfied, not because of what I chose, but because I knew why. Later, walking home, I considered how easily this story could be misunderstood. How tempting it would be to say a cowboy changed my life. It made for a cleaner headline. A better hook. But the truth was quieter and far more demanding. Luke didn't rescue me. He didn't replace anyone. He simply refused to participate in my self-deception. That refusal forced me to confront the life I was living on autopilot. It asked me to risk discomfort for honesty, and to accept that love without truth is just a well-lit room with no doors. As I unlocked my apartment, I felt the weight of that understanding settle, not heavy, but grounding. Whatever came next would not be perfect. It wouldn't be guaranteed. But it would be mine, and for the first time in a long while, that felt like more than enough.